We finally got to the beats, and it was just the guys, just Burroughs and Ginsberg and Kerouac. Hey, what about the women? There were some amazing women writing at that time. And the professor said, no, there were no women poets of note at that time. And I said, oh yeah, there were, and I'm going to show you.
Welcome to episode 3 of Unpacking the Beat Poets. The topic this time is women of the Beat generation, who have been sadly neglected until maybe the past 15 or 20 years. And interestingly enough, this parallels the position of women in surrealism. In both movements, for the first 10 years, the presence of women, the status of women within those movements was as models, muses, wives and girlfriends. And it was only in the second decade that they began to emerge as artists in their own right. And we're not going to be talking about all of the women artists associated with the Beat literary movement, and that included painters such as J. DeFeo, novelists like Joyce Johnson. We're going to be talking just about the poets. Diane di Prima is probably the best-known woman poet associated with the Beats. She was long-lived, she had a long career. Not all of her work has yet been published, so there will be future volumes of Diane di Prima poetry and essays. Before we get to Diane di Prima, I want to start with a woman that is recognized as a predecessor / contemporary, and that is Helen Adam.
Seeking love upon a day of summer's pride, I left Long Island suburbs for the Lower East Side. The train, it roared and thundered, and I sang above its scream. There's a cockroach coming towards me, but it cannot spoil my dream. Love, love, and LSD, it shall not spoil my dream.
Helen Adam was originally from Scotland, immigrated to the United States, and settled in San Francisco. She was recognized by other poets of the San Francisco Renaissance and the Beat poets, and the poets from Bard College that I mentioned in the last episode. Wayland, Gary Snyder, of course, Kenneth Rexroth, who was sort of the doyen of poetry within San Francisco, who made all the connections for all of these people. Helen Adam still wrote in a formal poetic language. She was a master of the ballad. Her ballads are considered exemplary, and of course, the ballad itself is a very strongly oral type of poetry. We go back to particularly the balladeers of France, the balladeers of England, who were recognized as both poet-singers, and indeed that was sort of the last strain of poetry before it became separated from music. So she continued to keep that alive, and at the same time, it was beat inflected in as much as, again, the personal is poetical. The language is everyday speech. Everything is the natural object is the adequate symbol. It is a poetry that is accessible and directly relatable to. So I'm going to start with a poem by Helen Adam to give you an idea of what she is writing about. Margaretta's Rhyme by Helen Adam. In Amsterdam, that old city, church bells tremble and cry. All day long their airy chiming clavers across the sky. I am young in the old city, my heart dead in my breast. I hear the bells in the sky crying, every being is blessed. In Amsterdam, that old city, alone at a window, I stand, a spangled garter my only clothing, a candle flame in my hand. The people who pass that lighted window looking me up and down know I am one more tourist trifle for sale in this famous town. Noon till dusk at the window waiting, nights of fury and shame, I am young in an old city, playing an older game. I hear the bells in the sky crying to the dead heart in my breast, the gentle bells in the sky crying, every being is blessed. This is a persona poem. Helen Adam is imagining herself as one of the prostitutes that stood in the windows of the red light district in Amsterdam. And again, it is a beat poem in as much as it has all of the specifics are there. And the response of that woman, the ability for Helen Adam to enter imaginatively into the life of this prostitute who displays herself in a window for passerby, is exemplary. Another one of Helen Adam's, the last words of her lover. The bald parrot said, "Better dead, better dead." The bats nestled thick on the wall. The sheets of my bed felt like lead, and dust smothered all. A glum thundercloud like a shroud, flowed over the vanishing sky, while the bones neath my skin raised a querulous din. Let us out, time to die. Oh, where will you run in the beams of the sun, snarling bones, when my body is dust? They replied, we will haste to your lady so chaste, and seize her with skeletal lust. You can see this connection with the beats. The subject matter is unconventional. It is not acceptable bourgeois poetry. It is not hearts and flowers. It is not couched in delicate language. It is direct and it is piercing. So Helen Adam was one of those poets that was a precursor of the women beat movement. I'm reading from a book called Women of the Beat Generation, edited by Brenda Knight, and it's not only poets, but it's also prose writers as well. Another one, a book of essays, the first that I know of, on the beat women is called Girls Who Wear Black, edited by Nancy M. Grace, and her co-editor was Rona C. Johnson. This is a book of essays. It doesn't contain, except for excerpts, work by beat women poets and writers. But it is significant in that it is the first book that talks about beat women writers and poets in their own right. Another significant beat writer is Mary Fabilli. Relatively unknown, I think she deserves a greater recognition. One of her friends in the San Francisco Renaissance was Robert Duncan, a major poet of that period, who wrote essays about what poetry is and what it can do. Letter to Robert by Mary Fabilli. We who devour our unclean dead are now arisen. We are walking in the corridors under the vaulted stairs. From our shady pockets the sun has never risen. These, our vested interests, are noble hairs. In derision we have worn them, exploring with our fingers, sensing the fragile bone. Who will atone for our deception? Who will commune with the morrow, breaking through with a stone? Listen, and you will hear them, the liars, the deceivers, running furtively to be alone in the shady corners, trailing their unclean fingers as they flutter up the stairs. We who devour our dead have left their prison. We have forgotten the twilight, swaying above their beds, the twilight, the fiery pebbles, the livid eyes on the stairs. But they have resumed our wisdom, liars all and believers, they, boneless bodies dead. They have heard us groan in the corridors. They have barred the doors with threads. We who are dead have devoured us and have gathered to watch these children playing games with our stones, with the polished bones of the dead. This is what I think of the international situation. Very lucid, it is not. A poem that is clothed in metaphor bears deciphering again. It's the kind of poem that you want to go back to. And in fact, there's a certain hermeneutic of reading poetry where I would say there's an outer, an inner, and maybe even a secret meaning to a poem. And I will start with that secret meaning first. And that secret meaning is what it means to you and nobody else. How it resonates in your mind and in your heart, and resonates in a way that is not familiar to anybody else. What it means to you personally. And then, of course, there is like the inner meaning that academics unpack, or that people, like presumably the people watching this program, are deeply into poetry and they will reread a poem and they will try to parse it out. And then there is that outer meaning, that surface meaning, which is what draws us all into the poem in the first place, and which can be understood on its own, as its own narrative, its own little story. And I think that When, for example, children are learning poetry, that is what they attach to first, that outer meaning. And sometimes if there are things in that surface part of the poem that stick in a child's mind, they will come back to it later and they will find depth in it. And I think that's one of the values of beat poetry, because it does have this surface texture that is inviting and that is not daunting. And now I want to turn to Elise Cowen. Elise Cowen, I guess, the French term, the poète maudite, the damned poet, could be applied to her. Frequently applied to Arthur Rimbaud and poets like that, but in Elise Cowen's case, very few of her poems were published in magazines, and not until recent years has there been a collection of her work. And it's been hard to track down. A lot of it was written in notebooks that were not preserved. A lot of it was in letters exchanged with other people, and then there were the handful of poems that were published. But nonetheless, she was considered a major poet at that time, writing in the late 1950s. Tragically, she died by her own hand at a relatively young age. A Skin by Elise Cowen. A skinful of screams, I think, bludgeon. Roselle under the bludgeon. Red queen of back of the office who stares at space into me. Roselle de Bono. Then, for Roselle, for me, a confusion of tears over the royal typewriter. Nutritious Roselle. Sitting. Sitting with you in the kitchen, talking of anything, drinking tea, I love you. Thee is a beautiful, regal, perfect word. Oh, I wish you body here, with or without bearded poems. With or without bearded poems. Well, what does bearded poems mean in this? Well, this is her erotic attraction for another woman. And she is leaving a hint here, like we lesbian women are supposed to write about our lovers as though they were men in order to be able to get away with it. So she drops in this hint of transgression in the last line of this poem. And I think that's a poem that is really worth going over a couple of times. I mean, to see how you can, it's a kind of a samizdat poem at a time when the patriarchy was in full flower. She was a sexual outlaw, with all that outlaw implies. So here is a way of defying patriarchy with the samizdat poem.
Have had to stop taking Enovid birth control because of dreadful fatness and exhaustion. It's good to be normal, and if I stand on my head every time I want to fuck instead of fucking, I'll be all right.
Hettie Jones is well known as a publisher of Eugen, a major small magazine beat publication. She co-published it and co-edited it with Zamiri Baraka, but at the time she was married to him, he was Leroy Jones. But she was also a poet in her own right. Her work has been published. Her memoir is well known, How I Became Hettie Jones. But these are a couple of poems by Hettie Jones. Welcome to our crowd. I've slept in every room except the kitchen, and that includes alone or with others, in symphony or cacophony. Now the man in his socks, the one asleep on his own pillow, the tender lover, curious youth, bossy fuck, all these clothed and naked visions are sharing particular angles of light, the rushed or lingering presence of time. They hang off the splintering beams. On the uneven floor we all lie down in layers, a hologram of lovers. His pillow under another one's head, the constant drift of old perfume, a jacket left behind on a chair, shoes later buried with the dead. They needed heels. The jacket is minus a button, torn sheets, the windows unwashed. We breathe and don't breathe, lie, pass in the hall, fall into all our arms, live again, gone soon. Sonnet. Love never held my hand like those summertime couples, palm to palm, the perfectly interlaced fingers, the pressures. Love never flung himself around my shoulder or measured my convivial waist. Love was a grand master, though, and he laughed when he came on like gangbusters. Who could refuse him? Ah, I knuckled under, no regrets, but I've always wondered. Poets that came toward the end, toward the late 50s, Joanne Kyger was one of them.
The best thing about the past is that it's over when you die. You wake up from the dream. That's your life. Then you grow up and get to be post-human in a past that keeps happening ahead of you.
She was married to Gary Snyder. They were a couple, but the marriage was one that was sort of a requirement when they went to Japan in order to be respectable, so they had to arrive as a married couple. Her works were published in magazines and a few anthologies. Her first book was published by a small press in San Francisco, Auerhahn Press. Not really until the late 1990s did all of her work come back into print, printed in collected poems and selected poems, and she was active until her death. She is also recognized as one of the influences on what later became known as language poets. We can say that language poetry sort of constitutes a stream, perhaps a flower that had some roots in the beat movement thanks to Joanne Kyger. This poem is untitled, as are most of her poems were not titled. Breakfast, he assured me. Orange juice, toast and coffee, just the way I like it. I flang the coffee cup to the floor. After 3 times, it split into 1,000,000 pieces. She worried about the small supply of dope in the other room. Both of them, Louis and Tom, were busy collaborating. The record playing, the wind howling, the electric heater going by her side as an ache over increased herself. It was a fact about which she thought a moment before, which was me. It was the love. He's fine. I wonder why he doesn't exchange some of the mescaline for dope. Give Tom some of the dope. I wouldn't go there into their minds. I hear, ain't I? Now through the mirror one can she see pine branches nodding in the blue California sun. And he makes love to her. He talks about afterward when some years ago he worked for the welfare department in New York City. She starts up a hue and cry. Oh, the money, the electricity. Give me some clothes, some jewels, some food, some love. Now moving on to Janine Pommy Vega, who actually passed away not so long ago. She was living up in Woodstock and she was writing to the end.
I've consulted the books. All divinations say the same thing, that my heart is restive, floating in backwaters, looking at empty hands.
Think of us as a people lulled into a cryogenic sleep by TV, suspended like Walt Disney and his ice cube under Disney World. How can we get our country back from the ice blocks and flows of corporate fists?
Her first book, I believe, was published in the City Lights Pocket Poet series, Poems for Fernando. Probably it was Nancy Joyce Peters that picked that one to be published. Nancy Joyce Peters was pretty much the secondary, actually primary, if people who know, the primary editor of the Pocket Poets series by the late 1960s. Ferlinghetti basically divided up the work with her. He was the editor of many of the earlier volumes. He was the one who decided we're going to publish these. But when Nancy Joyce Peters joined City Lights, she basically became the co-editor of the Pocket Poets Anthology series. The Drum Song by Janine Pommy Vega. Red and white candy-striped exit sign. Enter a hole in the wall to a hidden world of juju beads and maps the size of Atlantis and little boys stalking the deer of imagination. Red and white, Peruvian flag, the Polish flag, and other breastplates and gewgaws of domination since there ever was a war, since there was the idea of conquering your neighbor. Red and white, the woman in her childbearing years, and then herself, soft-haired, watching the fire, taking to her the grandchildren who want her stories, red and white, the passionate female, the passionate male. Orgasm and abstinence, hosannas coming up from the belly to the top of the head, red, white, the blood and bone, the skeleton in its scarlet flag. The two-step zigzag dance across the tightrope, the red and white agenda, wavering like a flock of geese, like a ribbon across the sky. Another significant poet from the beat era is Lenore Kandel.
I've cast the runes, there's honey in the sky. I want to roll in sugar till the comets chime. I'll be a bridge, come dance with me across myself. I'll dance with you. This bridge begins right now.
Lenore Kandel was at one time notorious in San Francisco for The Love Book, which was another sort of a landmark censorship case. The Love Book was the first case of that kind since the Howell trial of 1956. So we're talking about 10 years later. Vice cops bought it at a bookstore, turned it over, and they tried to ban it, and there was a trial to determine its value as a piece of art, especially coming from a woman to write about sexually explicit activity, to use obscene language, use explicit language. It was all the more shocking coming from a woman at that time. Enlightenment poem by Lenore Kandel. We have all been brothers, hermaphroditic as oysters, bestowing our pearls carelessly. No one yet had invented ownership, nor guilt, nor time. We watched the seasons pass. We were as crystalline as snow and melted gently into newer forms, as stars spun round our heads. We had not learned betrayal. Ourselves were pearls, irritants, transmuted into luster and offered carelessly. Our pearls became more precious, and our sexes static. Mutability grew a shell. We devised different languages, new words for new concepts. We invented alarm clocks, fences, loyalty. Still, even now, making a feint at communion, infinite perceptions. I remember, we have all been brothers and offer carelessly. God, love poem. There are no ways of love but beautiful. I love you, all of them. I love you. Your cock in my hand stirs like a bird in my fingers as you swell and grow hard in my hand, forcing my fingers open with your rigid strength. You are beautiful. You are beautiful. You are 100 times beautiful. I stroke you with my loving hands, pink-nailed long fingers. I caress you. I adore you. My fingertips, my palms. Your cock rises and throbs in my hands, a revelation. As Aphrodite knew it, there was a time when gods were purer. I can recall nights among the honeysuckle, our juices sweeter than honey. We were the temple and the god entire. I am naked against you, and I put my mouth on you, slowly. I have longing to kiss you, and my tongue makes worship on you. You are beautiful. Your body moves to me, flesh to flesh, skin sliding over golden skin, as mine to yours. My mouth, my tongue, my hands, my belly and my legs against your mouth. Your love, sliding, sliding. Our bodies move and join unbearably. Your face above me is the face of all the gods and beautiful demons. Your eyes, love touches love. The temple and the god are one. That is one of Lenore Kandel's transgressive poems, one of the poems that she was busted for. A lot of women poets who write explicitly about sexuality, about their own sexual behavior, probably some may not know it, some may, but it comes from Lenore Kandel's The Love Book. That was the first book out there that was so explicit and so graphic. And now I want to come to the most significant, I think, or probably the most influential woman beat poet, Diane di Prima. Starting in the early 1950s, her first books were published by Totem Corinth Press. In the late 50s, she was published by New Directions and other publishers. Her last book in the San Francisco Literary Treasure Series basically sums it all up with the poetry deal. I want to say that I don't want anything but the whisper of your scarf as you do the dance of the 7 veils, soft sound of your satin slippers on the carpet, and the raw, still bloody meat you toss my way that I chew on all night long. I don't want anything you don't already give me. Trips to other worlds, dimensions of light or sound. Rides on the back of a leopard on those black rocks, high over some sea or gorge, but it isn't true. I want all that. Sheet lightning of quasars that you dance between. Those colors, yes, but I want you as mother, sister. Stone walls of the cave I lie in trance for 7 days. The mist around my cabin that makes it invisible. I want the flare and counterpoint of words, and I want the non-verbal, what never can be spoken as a foundation. I like my daily bread, however you arrange it, and I also like to be bread, or sustenance for some others, even after I've left. A song they can walk a trail with. I don't think we talked about money or success or fame, whatever that is, for a long time. I hoped you'd forget that part. Now I'll do as you say about all that, whatever seems most useful. I'd like to keep learning about how to brew bitter herbs and how to make them translucent, edible, almost crystalline. What I offered you wasn't much. You can always wake me, like my closest friend or most loved lover. You can burn my favorite snapshot of myself, lead me on paths or non-paths anywhere. You cannot make sense for years and I'll still believe you. Drop husbands, tribes, and jobs as you wish. You mostly aren't jealous. Have taken your place alongside gardens, bread-making, children, printing presses. But when your eyes shoot sparks and you say, choose between me and it has always gone, except when it was my kids. I took that risk, and we worked it out somehow. Now I've come to a place where there are no kids, no tribe, no bread, no garden. Only you and your two faces, formed and formless. Nothing to hold back now and nothing to offer. I stand before you, a piece of wind with a notebook and pen. Which one of us is it dances, and which is the quasar? That is like one of the best Ars Poetica poems ever, in my view. One of Diane di Prima's most well-known books was Revolutionary Letters, recently reprinted by City Lights with additional revolutionary letters. And it originally came out at the time of the Vietnam War, which she was concerned, as were many of the beat poets, with what was happening in the larger world, the world of war and peace, the world of work and pleasure, the world of buying and selling, the marketplace, the whole zeitgeist of the headlines of the day. Anne Waldman had this phrase called poetry is news, and this is a poem that sort of addresses that. Memorial Day, 2003. Today is Memorial Day. Take time to remember those brave souls who gave their lives for freedom. Dear Abby. Remember Sacco and Vanzetti. Remember Haymarket. Remember John Brown. Remember the slave revolts. Remember Malcolm. Remember Paracelsus. Remember Huey and little Bobby Hutton. Remember Crazy Horse and Chief Joseph. Remember the Modoc and the Algonquin Nation. Remember Patrice Lumumba. Remember the Dream of Africa. Remember Tina Moditti. Remember Makhnoff and Tesvara and Mayakovsky. Yes, goddammit, even remember Trotsky. Hey, do you remember Hypatia, Socrates, Giordano Bruno? Remember my buddy Tamerlamon de Foix? Remember Seton, the Commonplace? Remember Edward Kelly, alchemist, murdered in prison? Remember to take your life back into your hands. It's Memorial Day. Remember what you love and do it. Don't wait. Remember, life hangs by a thread, anybody's life. And then remember the poets, Shelley and Bob Kaufman. Remember Van Gogh and Pollock. Remember Amelia Earhart. Remember it's not a safe time, and all the more reason to do wholeheartedly what you have to do. Remember the women and men of Wounded Knee, Kent State. Remember where you stand in the midst of empire, and the Huns are coming. Remember Vercingetorix, Max Jacob, Apollinaire, Shirawardi. Remember that all you need to remember is what you love. Remember to marry the world. Even an hour of this would be too long, white phosphorus. Even an hour of this would be too long, white phosphorus. Great lords of the sea, it is Tyre that is burning, that harbor. Great lords of the sea, it is Tyre that is burning that harbor. Don't ask why I have bad dreams, ask why I don't. Don't ask why I have bad dreams, ask why I don't. In this episode, we've talked about a range of women beat poets. There are many more. The books that I mentioned, Girls Who Wear Black, which is basically a collection of essays on women beat poets. Women of the Beat Generation, which is a terrific anthology with background information on each of the contributors. It contains more than poetry, there is prose in that. A Different Beat, writings by women of the Beat Generation by Richard Peabody. All of these books are worth having as a way of starting to delve into the women beat poets. And they have, their daughters live on, and we're going to come to that in our next episode, which is the continuity of the beat movement in the present. So thank you for listening. See you next time.